Right. Hello and welcome everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. I just want to give people a chance to get their audio preferences settled before we start. All right, this seems like a pretty good critical mass. So I'll make sure that I type this out for people that are joining a little bit later, but welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started and hand it off to our presenters and the moderator, I just want to cover a few technical details in case you haven't joined us or used Zoom webinar in the past. Your cameras and microphones are disabled by default, so you don't have to worry about interrupting us or anything, but that does limit your to text-based. So for general discussion or comments, you can use the chat feature. Just make sure that you select everyone from the little "to" drop-down menu there if you want everyone to see your messages. Otherwise, only we as the host and panelists will be able to see them. And then if you have questions, feel free to put those in at any time using the Q&A function. You can use those anonymously, so you don't have to share your name if you don't want to, but other people will be able to see the question itself regardless, and they can comment on it themselves or even like it if they so choose. So without further ado, I want to hand it off to our moderator for the day, Sarah Kessler.
Good afternoon and welcome. As Mike said, I'm Sarah Kessler, Associate Registrar at the University of Georgia. And on behalf of the Women's, thank you for attending this webinar today. It clearly has a lot of interest piqued in our organization, so thank you for joining today. I'd like to welcome Drs. Burke and Huey. Dr. Monica Burke is a professor in the Department of Counseling and Student Affairs at Western Kentucky University. Prior to her 22 years of experience as a faculty member and practitioner in student affairs and higher education, she worked in the field of mental health. Dr. Burke has authored numerous peer-reviewed articles in scholarly journals and contributed to chapters in various books. Dr. Aaron Huey is a university distinguished professor in the Department of Counseling, also at Western Kentucky University. Before joining the faculty, he spent 10 years in progressive administrative positions, authored or co-authored over 65 refereed publications on a wide range of issues, including leadership and student development, standardized testing, diversity, legal issues, technology, and education administration. As Mike stated earlier, please post your questions in the Q&A function and our speaker to those questions for us at the end. And now I'd like to hand it over to our speakers for the topic at hand. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah and Mike. We appreciate that. Let us presentation here. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. We appreciate you tuning in for this topic. There seems to be considerable interest, which is good. I just want to say that when Sarah first contacted us about doing this, we both thought it'd be really good to kind of do both of us here because you kind of get both those perspectives on things. And Dr. Burke doesn't always like me to tell this story, but one of the reasons I got interested in this topic was that this happened on more than one occasion. She would come into my office a little bit discouraged about something or a situation she was dealing with and sit down, and she would kind of describe to me, well, here's what had happened. And I would go, well, that's pretty simple. All you got to do is this, this, and this. And then she would sit there and look at me for a minute and go, no, you could do this, this, and this, and probably get away with that or it work out well. But if I were to try to do those things, there'd be more questions and that kind of thing too. So she really opened my eyes to this topic and to how to see that we're all treated differently based on such things as gender and race and those things. And so when Sarah actually got in touch about us doing this session, I thought it would be ideal to have kind of both of those perspectives in here about this. So we do want to make this interactive as possible. We were talking about this before the session started, that we do want to get to any questions, comments you might want to make. We will leave time at the end in order to do that. So, you know, sometimes when we start answering questions as we're going through the presentations, we can get a little bogged down, and then we have to rush through some of the latter slides, and we don't want to do that because we got some really applications oriented information here to present to you. So without further ado, we will get to your questions and we'll allow some time at the end for that. So as we're going through the slides, just jot down things that you want to ask about, talk about, and we will allow some time at the end to do that. So thank you.
And as Aaron has mentioned, I have experienced some barriers and challenges in my career identity and professional identity over the years. And as I often joke with people, my life is a novella. So I've encountered some of these barriers and challenges, and I kind of want to spend a little time talking about doing a general overview of these barriers. And one, of course, is bias for women. And so we all have unconscious biases. It's like I often describe it as like the grooves in a record player, in a record, the old time, for those young, you may not remember, the record players had the grooves in it and it would play. That's how it is when we learn about stereotypes and we have these biases. And so they come up automatically when we deal with people. And it comes to the duty of us as professionals to recognize it and then act accordingly. Make sure we recognize that we're not letting it bias interpret how we work with and treat other people. And so since we all have unconscious bias, we have to understand when they are in play, when we're engaging with other people. And so women, of course, we face these unique challenges, especially women of color, because we have that duality of being a woman and then being marginalized as a person of color. And then if you add on others like lesbian and other things, that creates more challenges for us. And so when we get to the workplace, we can't ignore that these come out, and it impacts our career advancement. Years ago, I actually conducted a study with Dr. Joel Carter, and we interviewed, I think like 60 something women about this, Black women. And that was something that came up, like when you do the things that we've been told to do to move ahead, get the degrees, do research, volunteer. And they were all noticing, but we're not really getting ahead. So what is it that's kind of hindering us? And the one thing is that you realize that we can do those things, but we can't control other people's biases against us. And so we kind of started talking about the strategies too that we can use to kind of get ahead. The other one was, of course, the gender stereotypes, and that women tend to be seen as more nurturers. If you think about it, when we're younger, the toys that we even give little girls, especially in the days of old, like with dolls, and things to kind of get them to be more of a nurturer. And little boys were given things that were more like about making decisions, like the little army men and being strong. And so that kind of carries on into the workplace as well, that we have to kind of find the right balance as a woman. You can't be too aggressive or take too much charge, but you can't be too much of a nurturer. So that puts women in a precarious position often in the workplace. And so if we don't find the right balance, that sometimes impact us moving ahead in the workplace as well. Of course, there's a lack of inclusivity in the workplace. If you tend to look in the upper echelon of the ranks, in most institutions, you will see that it's usually males, particularly white males who are in those positions. And so it's, often that women can feel excluded, even if they do get to those positions, because they're sometimes the only one at the table. And so that can often lead to being not as satisfied with your position, and often attrition, because, women was like, I don't particularly like this, I'm going to go to another institution, or I'm going to leave the position. And also a subset of that is this idea of the outsider within. So you could be in the organization, but still feel like, an outsider. You don't get the full benefits of being in that position, or you don't get the full benefits of all the work you've done, the good work that you've done, as opposed to some things that are given to males that aren't necessarily given to females. And one example I can think of is years ago, I was on this committee, we were looking at salary compensation for people. And in the meeting, we came to my supervisor, who was a male's name. One of the males started speaking, oh, he deserves a raise because he's done all these great programs. He started naming the programs. And I was sitting there, the programs he was naming the programs I had done and brought to the institution. And so, I was like, well, should I say something or should I just be quiet? But there was another woman at the table who knew of my work, and she spoke. She said, let me be the one to say it, that those programs are the ones that Monica started. And we're giving him a raise based on her work. And I'm sure I'm not the only woman in the world who's experienced that, or who has had to deal with that, where your work, the credit for your work is given to the male in your office, if there is a male above you or who works with you. And that was one of the first times I was like, this is what it feels like to be an outsider within. You know, I'm here, but I'm not getting the benefits and the credit for all of my work.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that Dr. Burke in particular has taught me is sometimes not to say I know how you feel, because I really don't in those situations. Dr. Burke and I have been in a lot of the same meetings and watching the same interactions about things. I will come to a completely different interpretation of what just took place. And then she will have to enlighten me on later. Well, no, if you were really paying attention, you would have seen this actually happening. You know, we all deal with that at most of our institutions. There are people out there that think because you report to them, they can take credit for whatever you've done. And I think that gets amplified when you're talking about women and women of color in particular, too.
Yeah. And I often joke with him, like I've had some students say, who think Aaron, I work for Aaron. And I have to remind them that I don't. And nicely. But it's sometimes I know that comes along with the whole idea of gender. Although we both have, you know, well, doctorates, and we both been teaching as professors, and we both were administrators. It's interesting sometimes how they automatically assume that he's my, you know, my boss. And then gaslighting.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of you women have experienced this. I'm sure most of us, all women and men, but you know, this is when we talk about women in careers, like when you try to get a woman to start questioning her own reality or her perception of something. You know, if you ever had someone say to you, oh, calm down, you're being so sensitive about things. Oh, I'm sure he didn't mean that. Where's your sense of humor? And so that's goes along the lines of them gaslighting women to think, you know, doubt yourself, you know, don't trust your judgment.
Or when people say things like, before Dr. Burke has even responded, somebody goes, now stay calm when I tell you this, okay?
Yeah.
You're setting the stage for the dynamics to kind of already put her on the defensive before she's even had a chance to talk about her perspective on things.
And especially when there are people in positions above us who have more experience, who tell us those things. And years ago, I remember someone asked me, like, when I first started student affairs, like, what do you want to do? And I said, I'll maybe eventually be a dean of students. I'm not sure. I'm still trying to figure out. I just want to work for a little while to figure it out. They're like, oh, I don't think you can be a dean of students. Trust me. And I did ask him, like, why should I trust you? Like, I don't understand, like, what makes you think you know more about my abilities than I do? I know more about my abilities than you know about my abilities. Probably wasn't the best thing to probably say, but I wanted him to understand that, you know, you're not going to deter me from pursuing what I think I can do and recognizing what my abilities are. And we all go through that, you know, that time that we do question. There have been moments where people have said things as a gaslight moment that have maybe questioned, can I do this or should I pursue this? But that's something that women have to go through, especially when it comes to leadership opportunities, which can be more difficult for us. So I know we all heard about the glass ceiling, or some people say the concrete top, and the glass cliff, where, you know, there are barriers that exist for us. And sometimes when we do get those opportunities, it's only when there's chaos or trouble in the organization.
Yeah, I mean, and as a kind of a counter to that, I always have to tell the story. When the first meeting I had with Dr. Burke, she got hired to work in diversity programs here. I went up and introduced myself, and she started telling me about some research she was doing. At our very first meeting, I said, you know, you need to be on the faculty. And she goes, no, I'm like when I'm doing administration. And so it's funny how life works out sometimes. She was a fantastic administrator, but she's a pretty darn good faculty member too. And so, you know, we had that first conversation. Sometimes if you're paying attention, you can just tell those types of things when people start describing the passion they have for what they do. And I've always appreciated that about Monica.
Yeah, which leads me to my next topic, is lack of role models. And that's something that we as women sometimes experience, especially the higher up you go into an organization. And if you don't have a role model, sometimes it's difficult to know, you know, the ins and outs, the unwritten code. And so I remember kind of watching the previous provost some years ago, watching how she handled meetings, because she was one of the only women in upper administration. And I think she noticed me watching, so she would invite me to meetings sometimes and say, you can sit in the corner and listen or take notes. And I appreciated her doing that for me. And then as a female, but then also most of my, when I say role models were male. Even, this dude here was one of my early role models. Even him trying to push me into faculty, which he succeeded in doing. But he was a role model, and most of my role models have been males. And that's something that women typically run into, is that women I know who are in vice president positions or leadership positions have often said the same thing. Most of our role models and mentors are males. And that could be one, because of the lack of females in the positions, and two, this effect I call the Highlander. I don't know if you all remember this TV show and a movie years ago called the Highlander. There could be only one. And there are some women who get in positions because they think, I'm the only woman in this position. If I bring in another woman, they'll push me out and put this other woman in my position, or see her in a better light than me. So I can't let her come in and be successful. And so in that case, women tend to not be able to want to be mentors for other women sometimes. And then also, secure sponsorships. So it's a difference between having a mentor and having a sponsor. Kind of describe it like, the mentor is the person who shows you the gun. The sponsor pulls the trigger. They're the person who like put you in positions to get new positions, and they're the ones who make phone calls for you to get opportunities. Those are sponsors. They are intentionally trying to advance your career. A mentor may be able to provide advice and talk to you behind closed doors and promote you in conversation, but a sponsor can actually be more active in doing it. And sometimes it's difficult for women to secure a sponsor.
Yeah, and another thing that's kind of come full circle is that now I consider Dr. Burke to be one of my role models. And so I try to emulate some of the things that she does at the teaching level, and even in meetings and those types of things too. So one of the things we wanted to talk about here is to hopefully kind of present some realities that a lot of you can probably relate to out there. And one of the things that we try to remind folks of occasionally is that we got these 3 Ps. There's all kinds of things we could add to this list, but what's happening, particularly when women, or I've become more aware of this in the meetings that I've been in, just watching behaviors and dynamics and those type of things. It seems like there's always 3 Ps going on. There's the privilege. And my experience has been, as a white male, the people who want to argue the most vehemently that they don't have any privilege are the one that usually have the most. And then there's the position that somebody takes. We are in an academic environment where people are always judging you based on, degrees and what your title is and those types of things. And then there's always politics. I have to remind my students occasionally when we do this in the classroom, and I'm not talking about Republicans and Democrats. Any organization of more than 3 people has some politics going on in it. And these 3 things, if you understand what's happening and look at through the lens of these 3 things start to make a little bit more sense than they may have had previously. And one of the things, go ahead. One of the things here, I always tell folks, when you hire somebody, and I'm sure that was true when I got hired as a faculty member, when Dr. Burke got hired, we're basically looking for 3 things. We want you to be able to do this thing that we need you to do. If you're going to teach, you have to have some technical proficiency. We want you to be able to get along with other people, resolve conflicts, communicate effectively. And we want you to have the right desire, attitude, and motivation. And where Dr. Burke and I have had a lot of conversations about this, these things can mean different things to different people depending on those 3 Ps and everything else that we're talking about here. I could do the exact same behavior and somebody would think, well, that's fine, that's a really good job. Whereas she might do the exact same thing in a certain situation and people be finding fault with it and be more critical of it. Or, and some of you have experienced this too, Dr. Burke will make a suggestion. I've seen in faculty meetings from long ago, I used to see that she would make a suggestion, make perfect sense. Nobody would say much. 20 minutes later, I or somebody else that looked like me could say, well, have we thought about this? And everybody's going, well, did y'all hear that? That's a pretty good idea. And it's like, once you become aware of that dynamic, it's hard not to not see it. And the last thing there, you've got to have the desire. And this is where I think a lot of things that Dr. Burke was talking about earlier is that we confuse those things occasionally. If Dr. Burke is critical of something that the department wants to do or the college wants to do, it can be cast not necessarily on well, she doesn't know what she's talking about. She just has a bad attitude about this or whatever. She needs to be more of a team player. She needs to get with the program when essentially what we're saying is she needs to think like us, and that can be harmful, I think, to most organizations. And then this is just a quick slide I want to throw in for a lot of my students. If you're going to influence other people, you got to have three bases covered. You got to know yourself really well, which means you got to be honest with yourself. It's more important that you know how other people see you. And that's where a lot of people, they see themselves one way. Well, if Dr. Burke and I are in a meeting and she says something, I'm not responding to her to how she sees herself. I'm responding to how I see her and how I think she's coming across to me. And I'm going to, gauge my response to what she has to say based on that. And that's where people who look like me have to learn that we're seeing everything through this filter. And so I'm always not taking what she has to say at face value because I see it through the filter. This is coming from an African-American woman, and I tend to judge it a little bit differently than I would if it were coming from somebody else. And I always say the last thing you need to do is how to read people a little bit. You need to have a little bit of that empathetic type of thing. If I understand, I can never pretend to understand exactly how she feels. I'm not an African-American female that had the experiences she's had and all those types of things, but I can get better if I really try at understanding, okay, we've actually had this conversation. I can tell when she's a little bit upset about something, even though she hasn't expressed it. I can just tell. We've worked together for a long time. And so there's times I'll send her a text message and say, are you okay? Is everything okay? And then, we'll eventually have a conversation about it, but you can just tell. Now you have to care enough to want to kind of know how the other person thinks. But, you get better. The longer you work with people, the better you get at reading them, I think. And then you can not manipulate people, but you can use that to influence people to kind of see your point of view. The thing about having an advocate is sometimes you have to get somebody else to present your views in order to get people to get a little traction, and then you kind of retake control of that going forward. Okay. And these are some things that probably all of y'all can relate to out there. We have to tell our students, you might be the best student we have, the smartest, whatever you want to gauge that, and you just do a really, really good job, that's going to get you to the top. Well, most of us know working in academia, you need to be competent. In fact, I always say if you're really competent at what you do, you're going to be overworked and threatening to some people. So you just need to be prepared for those realities, and people expect you to play in harmony, sometimes more so than doing what's best for the organization. I've worked with people in the past that we just want everybody to get along. And no, we want everybody to get along, but we have a mission here. We're trying to educate, students and that kind of thing. And a lot of our students too, they don't understand initially bad bragging versus good bragging. Now, that's not something you grow out of. I still get accused of bad bragging every now and then about things, as opposed to good bragging, where the focus is not on you so much, it's on the accomplishments of what you're trying to do for the organization. What we're talking about here again is becoming a person of interest. Now, that can have a good side and a bad side. Dr. Burke is extremely competent and knows what she's doing, which means she's going to be the first person people think of anytime we have something important that needs to be done, which means she potentially has ended up being overworked and being assigned to every committee and task force across campus because she is good. And the problem comes in is that, she ends up being overworked and other people don't have enough to do because they're not quite as competent. And that can create some animosities and those types of things there. And this next one is a big one with Dr. Burke, so I'll let her kind of mention that one. Yeah.
Always CYA, and those who don't know, always cover your ass. Sorry. But, this is something I've learned over the years, and I always say to my students, because, document and record, because people will say one thing to you, and of course, I'm sure many of you know, they can go and do something else. And it's more of a way to protect yourself and to protect your reputation, your professional reputation as well. And a story I always tell them is when first time I realized how important it was to CYA was when I was working with in one of my first administrative jobs, and someone I was working with, we were collaborating on a program for the university, and it was a male, and he wasn't interested in doing the work. He was like, whatever you do. And then he's like, I don't really want to be involved with that very much. Well, the project started getting some traction and some notice. And so when his supervisor asked him, like, you know, what's going on with the program, how's it going? He's like, oh, and Monica shut me out the program. I don't know. And she, in turn, goes to the vice president of student affairs, who comes to me. And while he's telling me what's going on, asking me why was I shutting him out, I say, just give me a second. I print out every email, because in every documentation that I had of every conversation we had, and it was in there where he said he wasn't interested. And I took a highlighter and I highlighted that section and I passed it to him. I said, just read that first before we have this conversation. He said, no need to have a conversation. Thank you. And he walks away and he has a conversation with them. But that's why it's important, you know, because it could have easily gone another direction, because it would have been my word against his word. And so it's always important to just cover yourself and make sure you document and record everything. I even tell my students that even if you have a conversation in passing in the hallway or outside, you know, if it's something someone says to you that you want to do, you go back to your office, you send an email. It was nice conversing with you today, as a follow-up for our conversation. Because like I said, you never know sometimes, especially when you're a female, how things can turn sideways. And the other one is build your signature. That's something my father used to always say to us growing up, like, you know, your work should speak for yourself. And sometimes as other people see your signature, they will be impressed with you. Even if your department or your horrible supervisor is not, that can end up, you know, benefiting you down the line somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, I've got emails that I've kept ever since there was email. I download them to my hard drive and I keep up, and I got external drives. But yeah, you never can tell when somebody, you're going to need that information. The last thing I wanted to say about that too is you got to watch out for some people across campus. I've actually emailed them doing exactly what Dr. Burke said. And instead of responding to the email, they'll pick up the phone and call me. Just got your email. I want you to know that I think it's okay to you go ahead and do that. Well, I need you to respond to that email, because conversations can be kind of iffy, but if you put it in writing that you want me to do this and you're supportive, there it is. And so you got to watch out for people that try to be kind of sly about that sort of thing. Yeah, everything you do is building your signature, and so that could work in good ways and as well as bad ways. Yeah. Office politics. This is going to be something some of you are going to be shaking your head about, even as we talk about this. Life is unfair. You know, how I always tell folks, when they get hired into a job, our students do pretty well in the job market. And when they get hired, I say, you know, you're going to go through the formal orientation, but then you're going to have to figure out how things really work there. So keep your eyes open. In fact, I have told a couple of folks when they get hired to don't be saying a whole lot, you know, your first 6 months, 9 months, year. Just try to learn the politics, learn the personalities, learn the lay of the land. You know, with power, there's power that comes with position, and then there's power that comes with expertise and just knowing things or whatever. And I always tell folks, if the only power you have comes with your position, that's kind of the least amount of power. If you have to constantly remind people you're the vice president or you're the department head or you're the director, people will do what they have to do in order to get paid, but they're not doing it because of you and the influence that you have. People respect expertise. I don't care if you're at the lowest level of the organization. If you know what you're talking about, know what you're doing, people will associate that with power. And it's always, this could be a tricky one, determine the person who's really in charge. You know, sometimes the person that's telling you, well, I need you to do this, or I don't want you to do this, that's not the person making that decision. But the person that's actually behind the scenes making that decision may not want you to know that it's kind of coming from them. And the other thing that I know we've seen here from time to time is somebody will have a protector. And you got to watch out for those folks, because, you know, I can be kind of rough on you because I know if push comes to shove, I got somebody that has my back that's not going to let me get in too much trouble for doing that. And that's great until my protector sometimes goes away or retires or that kind of thing. And then I'm sort of open game, you know, for other folks or whatever. Well, one of the things that when we were putting together the presentation, we talked about, you know, a lot of this has to do with managing up. We all have to manage up. That doesn't mean we're in charge of the person above us. But when we talk about managing up, people have these misconceptions that it's about kissing up, you know, and there's a big difference, or telling your boss what to do. We all, you know, as we gain experience and learn how the system operates, so to speak, we learn how to, and Dr. Burke has already given a couple examples of this where she kind of figured out what was going on. And the best way to handle the situation from her position down here was to act in a certain way that precipitated the response she wanted to get from the people that were kind of overseeing. If you want the credit to be given to you for the things that you've actually accomplished and done, there are ways to do that without always throwing it in somebody's face that that's me, that I did that. What are you saying? There's ways you can make other people see that. There's strength in numbers. If everybody in the department knows Dr. Burke is actually behind this program, and I've got a director that's running around saying it was their kind of thing, well, there's always more of them than there are you. And you want to try to, eventually all of them will figure out a way to even the score, so to speak, or whatever. We just want to briefly just a list here, managing up, which means you're trying to, work with your supervisor to make sure that you do get credit for the things and the things that most of us have an agenda that we're trying to get accomplished. We have some things that we want to see come to reality. And so there's different aspects of that. You got to watch how you communicate. You got to be a little careful in the words that you use. I can disagree with my supervisor, but I can't walk in and say, well, you're stupid. This is not the way we're going to do. I can't believe you made this decision. Well, all that's going to do is create animosity and create an adversarial relationship. I tell our students all the time, if you're going to offer us an idea, offer solutions, not just problems. Nobody likes to work with somebody that just sits around and talks about how bad things are all the time. Never assume you have all the facts. That's a big one that I've learned to kind of, when I go into a situation, in fact, in some of my emails, I'll put my understanding of the situation. I may not have all the facts is this. Sometimes we just have to try to understand where our supervisor boss is coming from. Sometimes we don't put any effort into that. If I know what's important to Dr. Burke and she's my supervisor, at least I know where she's coming from, and I kind of know how to couch things in order, if I can tie it to something that she already thinks is important, then I'm going to be in a better position to let my idea see the light of day. Never assume you know what they expect. That's very true with most of my supervisors. Understand your own management style and whether or not it's compatible with the people you're working with. And this is a big one for people like me. And I think it's more of a problem, and Dr. Burke can agree or disagree. You look like me, I have a hard time soliciting and accepting feedback because I always think I know the best answer for everything. And so I know what I'm doing. So why would you even question that? I've been doing this a long time. One of the things I hope I never get to the point where I say is, I was doing this when you were in diapers kind of stuff, because when I was younger in my career, I always thought that was the most condescending kind of comment you could make to somebody that, well, I've been doing this so long, and therefore you could be doing a lot of things really wrong for a long period of time. I always said, all you need to get experience is to live long enough. We all have experience. Yeah. Some of you have been in this situation. I know Dr. Burke has been in a situation where supervisors are out to get me. Sometimes it's not your paranoia. Sometimes they're out to get you. I can think of some situations right now where I'm pretty sure the supervisor is out to get somebody. It's always better if you can get somebody to resign. That's a lot less messy than having to fire somebody. So we'll just create conditions that'll make you want to leave this place. And that you just need to be aware that sometimes this happens. Yeah. So, yeah, dealing with a bad supervisor, yeah, you got to choose your weapon carefully. Usually a full frontal assault is not going to work. You're going to have to come up with a different way of dealing with the situation. Look, I always tell folks, when all else fails, you probably need to look for something else to do. There does come a time when it's not going to be worth it. It's like some of our students have got hired in schools where they thought they were a little too liberal or a little too conservative, so they decide they're going to change the culture. Well, that's a much more daunting task than people realize. And I could name supervisors, and probably Dr. Burke could too, that I've tried. I'm not going to change them. The clouds are not going to part. The sun's not going to come in, and they're going to see the world in a more accurate way. I just need to probably find something else to do. I've done that a couple of times in my career, and always better to have something before you go in and tell them you're leaving. That makes people nervous. And then the last thing I want to say about this one is, look, if you didn't like it done to you, when you get in that position or a similar position, don't do it to other people. this is not a hazing kind of thing where they treated me awful. Now it's my turn to treat people awful. And it's like sometimes parents, you see parents that swear when they were a kid, I'm never going to treat my kids like this when I'm a parent. And you look up 20 years later and they're doing the same thing. Yeah. Now, I don't know if you want to. Yeah. These are, you might want to keep this slide. We're kind of keeping an eye on the time here. But some of you may look down this list and start to get kind of nervous. Okay. There comes a time when, you're no longer consulted. Other people know things more than you do. I love the second one there. I've actually seen that happen a couple of times. So it's not just one of those funny things in Dilbert. This actually happens. We want you to train this person. I think that happened to you in a situation where you were asked to train the person who was we had in mind for eventually taking over their position. Yeah. If your supervisor gets fired and you're closely aligned with your supervisor, it's time to get a little nervous. Okay. And there's no place left to go. We've all heard of the proverbial dead end job. Those exist in higher education. We find a way to put you in a situation where you can't really interfere with us or anymore. You can't really do anything significant, but you're not going to be a problem for us. And sometimes in higher education, we keep people around long after we probably should have, simply because they been here so long and they're so close to retirement, or they were on the championship team, or whatever you want to call it. So we have to kind of keep those things in mind. Yeah. Okay. Well, there's two things I think that can happen that happens to all people, and how you deal with this, I think, is very important. Being asked to do things that aren't in your job description, and just being unhappy with a project that you've been assigned. So I think some of you can probably relate to that. I know my experience has, and I know Dr. Burke and I have talked about this. Sometimes the job you thought you were hired into is not the actual job, and sometimes people will try to rewrite your entire job description based on what happens to suit them at the moment, and just completely exclude the HR folks from that process. Yeah. If that's not in your job, don't be aggressive and start pointing fingers. That's just going to create an adversarial situation. Make much to say anything. I'm a big believer. We have too many people who like to stew on stuff. You don't need to jump in before you have all the facts or go off the deep end or attack people, but you don't need to wait. I don't want to find out that Dr. Burke, she's been doing her job for 6 months. I found out she's been unhappy for 6 months the whole time, and then just complain to coworkers. Your coworker, trust us, your coworkers get tired of hearing you complain how unhappy you are all the time, and eventually we're going to be unhappy with you too. Yeah, and this is one of those phrases that honestly Dr. Burke taught me how to say a little bit more often. Help me to understand how this fits into the mission. Help me to understand why you've asked me to do this. It's a much more, a much more positive approach. Politely set boundaries with coworkers. Sometimes that's hard for folks. A lot of people that work in higher education, student affairs in particular, we like to be everything to everybody. We have to set boundaries, and then know your job description, document. It comes back to that one that Dr. Burke mentioned. You got document. Know who's asking, who's really asking you, and what you're asked to do. Sometimes people have two different understandings of what's going on. And again, the other one here, this project sucks. We just kind of say it. Don't complain about it. Don't badmouth it. Think everybody is your friend, that agrees with you, or there may be people out there that they kind of like the fact that you've got this project and it's better you than them, that kind of thing. The last one there, I like, well, not the last one, but drag your feet. I've seen people do that. They're unhappy with a project they've been assigned. So they just take their time, drag their feet, and they end up getting blamed for it. We gave them this project. They didn't do a very good job. They couldn't get it done on time. So sometimes all we do is give ammunition to people that they can turn around and use against us. And then the last one, I always say, hide problems. Anytime you're in a situation at work where you have to hide problems, you've got really serious, you've got more serious things going on at your organization than otherwise. Yeah. So, yeah, I have to click on there. Okay. Provide solutions. If you're not happy with a work assignment that you've been given, come up with some alternatives, ask for clarification. always in the back of your mind, keep, you may not be aware of all the facts. Try to communicate things constructively as opposed to negatively, and always keep records. You know, if you're telling them, well, this is going to cost more than you thought it was going to cost, that's kind of vague. You need to be very specific about those things. And it's kind of all we're talking about here is standing up for yourself. Just say no.
Yes.
This is one of your phrases. Yeah.
Yeah, no can be a full stop. It's one of my new things I've
Yeah.
been saying to myself and saying to others. And this actually came from my niece. I had a student contact me about helping them with a dissertation, and I already was supervising 7. And I was like, well, you know, I don't really have time now. They were like, well, I just really need you. And I was like, well, let me think about it. And so when I was telling her, I was like, I just don't have time. She's like, you know, no can be a full stop, right? And I'm like, you're right. So I just had to tell a person no. And, you know, and sometimes that can be difficult for people, as in women, when we're in a nurturing role, especially when people know that you're that way and they know that you have a difficulty saying no, or that you're going to be helpful. But no can be a full stop. And it's hard for a lot of us because, like I said, we've been taught, especially women, that it's disrespect for insulting, you know, not to be helpful and to say no sometimes. And you need to, you know, women tend to be able to, cater to other people more so than themselves.
Yeah.
We put others first often. Research has shown that over and over. And so we feel like we need to be cooperative as well. And we've been taught that from an early age often. And so, and then sometimes the other side of it is if you're not doing it, then you're seen as lazy or selfish, or people will go and say negative things about you. Well, she didn't help me, you know, especially when you're in higher education, student affairs roles, student service roles, you know, well, she didn't help me, she was helping you, but she didn't help me. And so we tend to be very wary of saying no to people sometimes.
Yeah, and there's different ways we can do this. Now, obviously, when you're dealing with human behavior, there is no script that's going to work in every situation, and you have to put your own spin on these types of things. But, you know, if you think about it for a minute, you know, I can't do it right now, but I can fit it in later as long as you're realistic about that list. I work with a lot of people that tell me it's on my list. I'm pretty sure they don't even have a list. And what I want is certainly not on it. I'm not the most qualified person. I don't have any room in my schedule. You got to be honest with people about things. I always tell folks, if you're working 16-hour days, you contributed to that in most cases, you know, by saying yes to everything. I'm one of those people that has a hard time saying no. If I can literally fit it on my schedule, I'll agree to it and then complain that I'm too busy and haven't get it working. I can't focus on that now. Made a commitment to complete this other thing that I want to give 110%. Normally I would say yes, but I have some things come up. I'd rather say no than end up doing a second-rate job. Can sound like an excuse sometimes, but it's very true for a lot of us. You know, some people are a jack of all trades and a master of absolutely nothing. You probably work with some of those folks. So, you know, I think we would both agree that your reaction, how you respond to these people that are making these requests of you or thinking unreasonable types of things or trying to take credit for what you've done, your reaction is going to be the key to how the whole exchange moves forward. You know, there's a time to get upset. There's a time to express, I'm really kind of angry about this right now. But, you know, you got to understand, too, that one of the things we've talked about is I can be angry about something and people say, well, Aaron's mad about that. Dr. Burke is angry about something and they're looking for other reasons. Well, you know how she is, you know, this kind of stuff, or, you know, so you got to, how you respond, you know, you've got to self-advocate, even if it requires a no. One of the hardest things for new staff members to do is to say no to a supervisor when they know they can't do something or shouldn't do it or can't do it effectively or whatever. You know, yeah, mentorship there, make sure it's more than go ahead.
I want to back up
Yeah,
one
okay.
second. For women, in terms of reaction, you know, we also have to be aware, and most of us already know how to do this, listening for coded and loaded language is what I call it. When it, you know, when they're saying, well, she's sensitive, are you being sensitive right now? Or for women of color, sometimes they're saying, especially Black and Latino women, saying, you know, well, you know, using the code words for the angry Black woman, angry woman of color. We have to be, you know, it's supervisor to be aware that as we are as a coworker, but the reaction of how we have to also take into account, like when we react, that's going to more likely sometimes be one of the messages that are given to us. And also being a self-advocate, like I said, requiring a no. Sometimes you have to just say no outright. Don't even, sometimes I know he talked about giving excuses, but sometimes no. Years ago, my supervisor asked me, asked me to take PhD off my name off the website because he didn't have one. And that was a full stop no. And so, and I didn't have to require any explanation beyond that, but sometimes you have to be an advocate for yourself and not feel like you have to give in to what the person is asking you.
Yeah, I had a supervisor one time that loved to put a bunch of initials after their name. There's nothing wrong with putting a bunch of initials after there. But so I went in on mine and I put all my BA, MS, MA, STP, FBI, you know, and I made my point in different ways about that kind of thing. Yeah, avoid mentee collectors. Yeah, some people, you know, they pride themselves on the number of mentees that they have. And so it becomes more of a status symbol for them as opposed to actually helping people in their careers. You know, networks, both within your workplace and externally, are very important. There have been times when I know I've consulted with people at other institutions to get an outside perspective. I know Dr. Burke does the same thing. She has an extensive network, much better network than I do. So to consult with people to find out, you know, help me to understand what's happening here in this situation. And as an outsider, what can you, an outsider to the organization, what can you tell? You know, lead from where you are. You know, sometimes you can lead from the bottom, you can lead from the middle. It takes different strategies for those things. And it takes different strategies based on, you know, gender and race and those types of things too. Take advantage. If your institution has a leadership and mentoring program, get involved in those things. And there's that word document again. You know, always make sure you document everything.
Yeah. And that's something I had when I had a very bad supervisor, actually a couple, that I had to learn that it was important to lead from where you are, because building my repitation beyond them was important, because they were never going to be an advocate for me. They were never going to say anything positive. So I learned to be on other committees, do things in professional organizations, let other people see the type of work I was doing, the type of person I was, because it's very easy for others to believe what someone else is telling them if they can't see you and see what you can do. So I can't stress that enough, that, you know, go outside, even outside of student affairs sometimes, and get mentors and get people who are going to be in your network and protect you and support you as well.
Exactly, I agree. Okay.
I don't have anything.
No, like I said, I can't emphasize enough that, you know, when Dr. Burke came to the department, and we're the two primary faculty members here in the master's program in student affairs. And we work together really well because, you know, her strengths are not my strengths and vice versa. And so we always say that between the both of us, they tend to get a full range of perspectives on things. So it's not just one of us. And I think we do try to culture and appreciate that kind of thing. Something she mentioned earlier is absolutely true. You know, people would come to me, we're on the same level. We're both full professors in the department. You know, she takes care of the internship. I'm kind of the program coordinator, but that does not mean I'm not a supervisor in any way, shape, or form. But people would come to me. And one of the things that has caused, you know, a little bit of friction for us over the years too, is that I would just kind of go along with it. So Dr. Burke did what? Well, that's kind of interesting, as opposed to saying, why are you talking to me about this? Okay, you know, have you talked with Dr. Burke about this kind of thing? And so if you're not careful, you get sucked into these things almost kind of unconsciously, where I have a tendency to want to respond. Somebody comes to me and with an issue, I'll talk to them about it. And Dr. Burke has brought to my attention, well, you need to understand, you're just trying to be helpful, but that's not what the intent was when they came to you. And it took me a while to see that dynamic that was going on. You know, that's the whole, you know, pit one parent against the other kind of thing, and try to win your point or your situation or whatever. And, you know, and people sometimes do this very consciously. I know we've been aware of situations where students have actually plotted as to how they're going to go about, you know, talking to her and then talk to me about it in order to get their way. And we've become much more conscious of that, at least I hope I have, you know, so that we don't let students do that kind of thing anymore. Yeah. So I know we wanted to leave some time for questions at the end. So I guess we'll open it up there.
Amazing discussion. So there are a few questions that we do have posted to the group. So the first one's from Michael. How do you go about confronting real issues related to someone who seems untouchable, i.e. a director who's the CEO's own child, if you work with students, a star athlete, somebody like that?
Me? Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I've been in that position, so with someone
That's
who's
what I knew.
quote unquote untouchable. And what worked for me was what I talked about, building externally, because that person would actively go out and try to criticize me. And so I was like, well, okay, so it's smart of me to make sure these other people see the other side of me. Or when you work with other people, you know, document and make sure you keep records of everything when people are untouchable. Because eventually they're going to run into a roadblock somewhere where somebody else is untouchable, and it comes up. So that's been how I dealt with it with someone untouchable. I just kept records consistently, and I also went outside and built my own reputation or signature outside of the office in the department.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to be insubordinate, but at the same time, you don't want to be seen as being complicit with going along with something that shouldn't be taking place. And again, I like the documentation. I've sometimes you've been a little too free. I will include people I will copy people on my emails to make sure they are aware. And sometimes I blind copy people on things just to make sure they're aware of what I've been asked to do in this situation. When I worked in administration, we get that all the time where somebody would apply late in the summer for housing and they would expect to get the premier building on campus, but they were way back down on the list, and somebody would call, well, I know one of the regents, or, you know, I know the vice president, and can you kind of bump them ahead of other folks? And sometimes I'd have a supervisor that would say, well, yeah. And I'm thinking, we can't do this, you know, at least I want to make sure that's documented that I said we couldn't do this. So when it ends up on the front page of the paper, you know, I'm not going to be the one that's going to be the scapegoat for this situation. So you got to watch out for that kind of thing too. Yeah. I would have done it, but you know, Dr. Burke wouldn't let me. Okay, you know, yeah.
Wonderful. We've got actually two more that are asking a little bit more about documentation. So the first one, do you have any recommendations for when documentation is viewed as not trusting the employee? For example, asking them to document flexibility in their work schedule in advance. I've tried stating that it was for my own need as a time approver, but I've been met with defensiveness and accusations of me not trusting them.
Well, people tend to trust people who are trustworthy. If there's a reason, you know, and this has come up over the last couple of years with the whole pandemic working from home kind of thing, where it's somewhat questionable is actually people are doing the things that we want them to be doing as part of their job. So in some cases, people have asked people to document or keep a journal or to tell me, you know, what exactly you did today at home, when in fact we wouldn't be doing that if they were in the office and we could see them, or those types of things too. So I think, you know, if people get to the point, we think of documentation as this real formal stick in your file kind of thing. Documentation, as we've kind of said, is just simply writing an email to the person, you know, can you just give me a summary of what you've done today? You know, I just need it for my records in case anybody ever questions this working from home kind of thing. Would we be able to defend that? And, you know, from my vantage point, if somebody is constantly asked to document what they're doing, that's an indicator of a low level of trust. And that's an indicator of larger problems in the organization than you know, just documenting.
And something, they're talking about documenting in terms of having a bad supervisor or supervision. It's just a safe way to protect yourself. One of my mentors used to say, you know, be careful, because one butt you kiss one day, kick one day might be the one you need to kiss another day. Yeah. And so sometimes you never know how things are going to work out. So it's best to just go ahead and have records of things. So if it turns sideways, you'll be protected.
Okay, so there is one more question actually on that as well. So this individual always follows up with minutes and emails. However, the new boss has removed that individual from various committees, failed to provide minutes, and told the employees that minutes are no longer needed. This has caused quite a bit of confusion, misinterpretation, and frustration. Any recommendations?
I'm still an advocate for, I mean, retaliation is going to always be a possibility. But I always say keep documentation quietly as well. Like my supervisor, he never knew that he never realized when I was doing the emails and things like that, that was my way of documenting what was said. He just thought he was replying to whatever. And so I just kept it, like I said, the example I gave about the vice president coming to me, just in case something comes up, I'll have this verification that I didn't do this. And so also with that supervisor, he would tell people that I'm trying to set her up to fail, and not knowing some of the people were my mentors, or they work well with me, they would come secretly tell me, hey, he's trying to set you up. So that was my reason for doing it secretly. But and I feel bad for that person, whoever said that, you know, at this point, it's time to probably look for something else to do if it's possible, because there's nothing you can do when someone starts retaliating at that level. They're taking off committees and they're doing all this other stuff. They're just trying to damage your career, build your signature and do something else. You can even build it on campus and go somewhere else on campus to work, which is what I did.
Yeah, anytime you start going to your supervisor's supervisor, you're going to be in a precarious situation. Now, I have known situations where the supervisor's supervisor agreed with me on some things, and that created an interesting dynamic on the day-to-day. But you got to be careful about that, you know. And also in higher education, we do a lot of things that you never can tell how it's going to come around. Like Dr. Burke was saying, you know, the butt you kick today, maybe the one you kiss tomorrow. Well, you know, I've known people that I got treated badly by someone. 10 years later, I'm on a search committee for a position that they're applying for. So, you know, and I don't think I'm a vindictive person, but it's, you know, it gives them something to think about. I was chairing a vice presidential search committee one time, and somebody I'm pretty sure didn't apply because I was chairing the search committee. And so that was an interesting kind of dynamic that I experienced. Yeah. Okay.
Great. Okay, so the next one from an anonymous attendee. Sometimes I've had disagreements with coworkers of color. They claimed my issue had to do with race, but it didn't. How do I respond to that? Essentially, they were using the race card as a defense, even though nothing I mentioned involved race.
I'm trying to find a way to see. Well, of course, we all see things through our own lens of our experiences and what we go through. So because the person said that maybe race was involved, doesn't mean that they didn't perceive it that way. So there's intention versus impact. So you may not have intended, or even that was part of the conversation, or even in your thought process, but something in the way you communicated it was perceived that way from the other person to the other person, by the other person. So only way you can, I often suggest when I teach my health and skills classes, to be honest with the person, say, hey, there's intention versus impact. I didn't intend to upset you. There was nothing in my language that indicated this. However, tell me, what did I say that made you feel that way? So that can be a moment for real conversations, because you may not even realize what you said that's offensive to something. And I had to do this with Huey sometimes, like, do you not see what you just said to me? Like, you know, he doesn't see it. And he's saying to me, like, and so it's nothing to upset the other person, but sometimes the only way we can learn is that we have those real teachable moments and conversations with one another. So sometimes, like I said, that's saying that some people don't use certain marginalized positions or opinions to do it. Some people do it to, you know, part of gaslighting, but there's a reason a person said it sometimes. So it might be a good time to have a conversation like, what is it that was said?
Well, in microaggressions, something I learned from Dr. Burke, can work both ways. So Dr. Burke comes to me and says, you know, I may be in trouble. I really went against the vice president. So I go, well, they're not going to get rid of you, Monica. You're a minority. So, you know, you're not going to have to worry about that kind of stuff, which, you know, and I've known people look like me that say that type of stuff, thinking it's kind of reassuring or whatever, when in fact, it's kind of demeaning, because what I'm essentially saying is that, well, something other than your job performance is going to, you know, or your perspective, they're going to look at your race and either they're going to make certain assumptions about that, well, I can I don't have to worry about you losing your job because, you know, we need more African Americans here, for example, so you're probably pretty secure, not realizing that that can be taken very racist too. Yeah.
We've reached the top of the hour, which is our, we've essentially exhausted our allotted time. And I know there are a few pending questions. So we can send the Q&A report to Drs. Burke and Huey and get some follow-up afterwards. And some people also asked if this recording will be available. Yes, it will be. You can actually use the same link you used to access this live session in order to watch the recording. It usually takes about half an hour for Zoom to process it. Alternatively, you can go to the ACRA website and effectively re-register, and you'll immediately be sent a link to view the recording from there, which includes an audio transcript as well as a chat log. The Q&A is not accessible there though, so that record will be only via this recording. I did want to once again thank Drs. Burke and Dr. Huey for coming and sharing their perspective with us today. It was really impactful. It was really insightful. I think everyone enjoyed hearing your perspective and kind of sharing their own in the chat as well. There was one final thing. At the beginning, you were talking about some research that you had read on how kind of gender roles, societal gender roles impact career choice or career behavior. Somebody had asked for a link for that. So maybe following that, I can send that out to everybody as well.
I think someone asked for the research I did with about women in networking as well. So I can.
Oh yeah, women, yeah. Yes, sorry. Yeah, so yeah, we'll try to follow up with that as well. But in the meantime, I want to thank you all for joining us and hope you enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.